Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission's regular meeting for November 22nd, 2021. This time I'll turn it over to Christine for a roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Britton?
Here.
Commissioner Frazier?
Here.
Commissioner Fisher?
Here.
Commissioner Knable?
Here.
Commissioner Rasmussen? Commissioner Wright?
Here. Thank you. This time we'll move to item number 3, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the agenda.
I have a motion from Commissioner Wright. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Fisher. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. That passes 5-0. Okay. On item number 4, open forum. This is a chance for anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda. Just to remind you, we have the MRCCA, the MRCCA Ordinance Amendment, and then also Mississippi Dunes. So if you want to speak on something that's not one of those two issues, now is your time. If you want to approach the microphone and state your name and address. So we'll open public forum.
We will have an opportunity to speak later then?
On those two items, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything not on the agenda tonight? All right, at this time, we'll close open forum. Item 5 is Chair's explanation of the hearing process. The Planning Commission is a volunteer advisory group to the City Council. One of the Commission's functions is to hold public hearings and make recommendations on land use and zoning matters. The purpose of these public hearings is to provide an opportunity for each applicant and citizen to present information, ask questions, and express opinions. Since these proceedings are televised and recorded for the public record, anyone wishing to speak must step to the podium and give their name and address before addressing the Commission. Staff reports are prepared and provided to the applicant and Planning Commission in advance of the meeting. The first step in the hearing will be for staff to present a summary of the report. The applicant will then have the opportunity to briefly explain the proposal and provide additional information or comments. Anyone wanting to speak in favor or against the proposal will then be heard. Upon completion of the testimony, the hearing will be closed to public comments. The Planning Commission will then discuss and act on the matter. 2 complete agenda packets are available for viewing on the back table. Please do not remove those items. The City Council will act on Agenda Item 6.1, MRCCA Ordinance Amendment, at their meeting on Wednesday, December 15th at 2021, and Agenda Item 6.2, Mississippi Dunes Park and Land Use Master Plan, at the meeting on Wednesday, December 1st. City Council meetings start at 7 p.m. With that, we'll move to Item 6.1, MRCCA Ordinance Amendment, Case TA 2021-019, with Mike presenting.
Here we go. All right, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area Overlay District. City staff is requesting a zoning text amendment to repeal City Code Title 11, Chapter 15, regarding the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area, or, as we're going to call it tonight, MRCCA for short, Overlay District, and replace the existing language with the DNR model ordinance. So a little background on the MRCCA ordinance. The MRCCA is a corridor of land along each side of the river, the Mississippi River, within the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The MRCCA comprises of 72 miles of river and some 54,000 acres of surrounding lands and impacts 30 municipalities. The city of Cottage Grove has over 39 miles of shoreline and bluff along the Mississippi River and within the MRCCA. I'm going to read off my notes here because there's a lot of information on the screen. The MRCCA was designated as a critical area in 1976 by executive order following the passage of the Minnesota Critical Areas Act. Impacted municipalities proceeded to adopt the MRCCA regulations in the late 1970s. However, since that time, the standards have not been significantly updated. Based on input from impacted communities, the state in 2007 established a process in which the Minnesota DNR could amend the MRCCA regulations. The City of Cottage Grove was active through the entire rulemaking process, which took up to 10 years. This process started in 2007 and hit the pause button a couple times, finally was approved in January of 2017. The Metropolitan Council also played a key role by ensuring the MRCCA plans were incorporated into impacted communities' 2040 comprehensive plans. The Cottage Grove MRCCA plan can be found in Appendix B of the 2040 comprehensive plan. Per the rules, once a local municipality adopted the MRCCA plan, the DNR will then notify the local government to update their zoning code to make sure it's in compliance with the MRCCA. A few cities have done that so far. Newport, Ramsey, Maplewood, and Champlin are a few that have updated their codes, and all the codes are very similar to the draft model ordinance the DNR has provided. Few cities have done some other, each city, as you know, is unique, so they have made modifications to address their unique conditions. All right. So the DNR model ordinance has 14 subsections, and the model ordinance was developed to help cities implement and develop their MRCCA standards to make sure they follow Minnesota rules, chapter 6106. So upon review of this zoning code, or the MRCCA ordinance, the staff and the city attorney determined that the best course of action would be to repeal and replace. So we are proposing to repeal the existing section, as previously mentioned, and replace with the DNR model ordinance. We are not changing anything from the DNR standards. So we are exactly the same as what the DNR is requesting for the update, and that which makes us consistent with Minnesota rules, chapter 6106. Now we're going to go, as part of the new rules became new overlay districts. These overlay districts are designed to more accurately represent existing and planned future developments in the Mississippi River corridor. The new rules identify 6 different districts. Cottage Grove has 4 districts, and they're shown on the screen. The first one is Rural and Open Space District. The second is River Neighborhood District. Third is Separate from River District. And fourth is the Urban Mixed District. So there's some key changes that we want to discuss here, mainly that affects single-family homes along the river. The new MRCCA regulations or rules relax setbacks for structures to bluffs in the ordinary high water level. They also allow decks and patios to encroach up to 15% into the required setback. Reduce setbacks for subsurface sewage treatment systems. As we've seen previously, we did have one of these in front of us a couple months ago. That would have been permitted with this current ordinance. However, then we had to do a variance. And the year before, we had another situation similar to that. In addition to averaging of setbacks for principal structures, this is a very common ordinance for cities that have lakes. So we'll be allowing that, and there's an example on the screen of how we calculate the average setback. In addition to, there will be a vegetation removal permit and restoration plan for properties that remove the majority of trees and shrubs. This permit will be going on our website once the council adopts this. There's also a couple other things we have to require to update our website per the DNR standards as well. And then the last one here, once again, another variance we had earlier this year which is permitted by the new ordinance. All legally established non-conforming principal structures and decks may be expanded laterally as long as the structure is not in the bluff impact zone. Previously, we had one this year on River Acres that did have a proposed addition that was lateral, which would be permitted through this ordinance. So there's a couple ones that really pertain to single family. Also, the ordinance does a nice job too of cleaning up the revised building height and setback requirements. Each district has a specific height requirement and setback to bluffs and river. Through this, we did provide a draft ordinance to the DNR on June 28th, 2021. The DNR did provide us with a conditional approval letter that was received on November 1st, 2021. The ordinance has been updated. The one that's in your packets has been updated to address their comments. There's only one comment they added, want us to add one little section that that we did address. And then also a public hearing notice was published in the Pioneer Press on October 13th, 2021. And we have not received any comments from the public. In front of you is the recommendation for tonight, and I am here for any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions for staff? All right, thank you. This time we'll open the public hearing on the MRCCA ordinance amendment. Anyone who wants to speak, you may go up to the podium and state your name and address for the record. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. If you hear a bell go off, that means your time is up, and then we'll just have you finish up and take a seat, all right? So public hearing on this application is now open.
Good evening, and thank you, Commissioners. I'm Colleen O'Connor Toberman with Friends of the Mississippi River. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight for a lot of river-oriented things on your agenda. FMR has worked very closely with all of the cities so far that have adopted their MRCCA ordinances. So after my comments, if I can answer any questions, any things about what other cities have done, any clarifications, happy to help. Feel free to call on me. I want to make a couple of small recommendations to tweak your ordinance. Nothing that relates to the substance, let's say, of what can be built or be done under the ordinance, but a couple of things that I think will ease the administration of the ordinance based on what we've seen in other cities. So the first one relates to the review process for variances and CUPs. On the packet I had, it was page 10 of the ordinance that talks about the process for granting variances and CUPs. It requires written findings for granting a variance. It does not require written findings for granting a CUP. I would encourage you to recommend adding just one phrase requiring written findings for granting a CUP as well. That adds some consistency. I think it's something that every other city has done with their MRCCA ordinance, so it's just kind of a good common sense improvement to make those two consistent with each other. The second recommendation I'll have is it was on page 13 in my packet. It's also in the administration section. It's relating to notifying the DNR and National Park Service about public hearings for discretionary actions. Your draft ordinance says that your notification period for that is 10 days. I would suggest lengthening that to 21 or 30 days. Trust me when I say this is for your sake. The DNR and National Park Service provide a lot of technical assistance during project reviews. The DNR also has some enforcement responsibilities over MRCCA. And when these agencies get short notice, they often then step in at short notice with important information that affects the city's understanding of the project. And I've seen it happen many times where the DNR, without having enough advance notice, shares information, for instance, at a planning commission meeting that has a big impact, and it just makes your meetings more confusing to get that information last minute, often results in delayed decisions, and it also increases the risk that the city might inadvertently make a decision that gets appealed. So, giving the DNR and National Park Service more notice makes it easier for them to provide their review early on, which makes your meetings clearer, less confusing, and more likely to proceed with the decision on the right timeline. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for your work on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak for or against this application? If we could get your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Adam Grahams. My address is 10655 Great Cloud Trail South. I guess I would just like to ask that if there's any delay to Mississippi critical corridor ordinances that are currently in the works, that any maybe future projects, especially relating to the Mississippi Dunes, that get included in there if there's a delay around there. I don't know, when it comes to the developers getting permits or whatnot, I don't know if there's anything that can be done to make sure that those new permits are following these ordinances. So that's all I ask, is that's been taken into consideration. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else looking to speak for or against this application? Okay, at this time, I'm going to close public hearing on this application. I guess I'll start off, Mike, and I don't know if Amanda, you want to chime in on this. So there was a comment about written findings on conditional use permits versus variances. Obviously, we deal with those issues outside of the MRCCA corridor. I know we do written findings on variances. I just can't remember, do we do written findings on conditional use permits that are not in the MRCCA?
Yes, Chair, that's a great question. We currently do not do them for conditional use permits. as part of this application tonight, we could add that language if the planning commission does deem necessary, but currently we do not.
Okay.
We do it for variances, and I think we do it for planning and developments as well.
Okay. And then the other thing that was brought up about the notice period, 10 days versus a longer period, does staff take any position on that or see any benefit to making a longer period?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I would recommend at this time, given the fact that many of the times our applications have a 30, 60-day window, so for our applications, we would request that the state agencies respond to us in that proper 10-day window so that we feel we could address any of those concerns up front and not actually have to have the applicant have an undue process in that. So we would recommend that we stay with the 10-day process.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments for staff about the application?
In regards to if this is approved by the city council, when would it take effect and how does it affect any processes that are ongoing?
Yes, that is a good question, Commissioner. I actually want to turn it over to Amanda Johnson on that one. When does this take effect from a legal precedence after the council approves it? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I believe that's 30 days after it's been posted.
That's my understanding as well. We have been reviewing applications as they come in to make sure they are in conformance with the MRCCA ordinance with the proposed one that's in front of us tonight. So we know this is going to be going into effect, so we want to make sure it's very consistent with this proposed ordinance.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Any discussion on the application? All right, at this time, I would look for a motion then.
I'll move to approve the repeal and replace of the City Code Title 1115 Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area Overlay District.
All right, I have a motion from Commissioner Britton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Wright. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carries 5-0. This time we'll move on to item 6.2, Mississippi Dunes Master Plan, case M2021-078 with Emily Schmitz presenting.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As indicated, the next item before you this evening is the Mississippi Dunes Master Plan. For those who are unaware, the location is the prior Mississippi Dunes golf course, which of course is located just off of the Mississippi River, adjacent to the DNR SNA and just south of 103rd Street. I think it's important to take a look this evening at the site history. Before you is an aerial from 1937, which clearly indicates the majority of the Mississippi Dunes site was tilled field at that time, all the way up until the early 1990s, when the property owner at that time did receive approval for and proceeded to mass site grade for the establishment of a golf course, which then operated from the early 90s to around 2017, when the golf course did shut down and close and sat vacant until the current property owner purchased the property sometime around 2019. Some additional items on the existing site that were taken into consideration as a part of this master planning process include, of course, the railroad tracks that do extend the entirety of the east side of the property line and what types of restrictions to potential development those provided. The river navigation. This is in the backwaters of the Mississippi River, so the water is a little bit shallower, some stumps, areas with sandy islands and things of that nature. So limiting those recreational abilities with motorized boats and things of that nature. Again, the all-way stop bridge that most are familiar with as you head down to the site. PFAS in the area have been, of course, identified, which does limit the ability to service the site, so that needed to be evaluated with potential development. MSP flight path does in fact extend kind of, I'll call it up the Mississippi. And then finally, the historic home, excuse me, on the north end of the property, the William Cohen home, which we do have the city's historic consultant reviewing that property and any historical significance that should be taken into consideration. In addition, I think it's important to look at the land use history of the sites. This takes us all the way back to the 2030 comprehensive plan. At such time, the property was guided specifically as golf course. And the intent at that time was to differentiate golf course from park, with the understanding at that time that golf courses may redevelop. And so we wanted to, or at that time, have the ability to evaluate potential redevelopment. And then in around 2017, when we started discussions for the 2040 comprehensive plan update, we had also been hearing a lot of ideas with potential uses for this particular site by the landowner at the time. Some of you may have recalled anywhere from music venue to a campground, things like that. So the city thought, okay, we need to kind of adjust our thinking and give ourselves a little bit more of an ability to review the site for future potential development, which is why you see the site guided as transitional area planning in the 2040 comprehensive plan. So that gives the city the ability to work through what you see before you this evening is a master plan process. Very high level review of the site and potential and future development. So around March of this year is when this process has started. So it's been a long process, to say the least. In March, the city hired ISG as a consultant to put together this master plan and work with us through our ideas. So that began in March. Since then, 7 or 8 months later, we've been to several parks commission meetings, as well as a lot of city council review in between that time. I think it's important to note that through September into October, we did have an online portal open to acquire all public feedback, comments, things of that nature, as well as an open house on October 7th, where folks were able to come, chat with us, learn, receive ideas on the proposed plan at that time. And so now the plan has been whittled down, I will call it, and is before you this evening for your review. So we'll take a look at a little bit of the specifics of the master plan. So as you can see, we are proposing low and medium density on the site. And so I think it's important that we talk through the determining factors of how we came to the proposed density on the site. First being the county road alignment that was determined by Washington County as a part of their southwest arterial study. So that realigns 103rd as it comes down through the site, which creates a little bit of a, this is a technical term, goofy part of the parcel. And so how do we look at development of that area and what might fit best? So as you can see, medium density has been proposed to kind of fit in that area. Second, it was important to take a look at the city's and the city council strategic plan, providing some diverse housing and lifestyle housing within this community that aligns with the low density and the medium density guidance. The proposed medium density at that north corner also does align and flows nicely with the already guided medium density above the hill on the driving range. So it creates just a little bit of a flow as we look at potential future development. And finally, it's important to note that staff does have to take a detailed look at traffic, and road networks and utilities, and can what we're proposing be supported? And at this time, from a high level look, it can in fact be. I also wanted to make mention that at the very beginning stages of this master plan, you may have seen renderings that showed some additional medium density. Council's direction at their last workshop as part of their review did request that that medium density be pulled back and additional single-family development be proposed with the master plan, so that's why you see a smaller portion. It's approximately 7 acres plus or minus, again, high level on that corner of medium density. So now that I've spouted off about low and medium density, what does that mean and what does that look like? Low density is very similar to the Summers Landing development just to the north, Calarosa north of 65th Street. Medium density, similar to Woodward Ponds at Keats and Military, Glacial Valley, and even Settlers Bluff at on 100th and Hadley, where you're seeing those. They're detached, but still meeting that medium density. Now, I think it's important to take a look at the park master planning process a little bit separately and what that process looks like. Again, a lot of work has been put into the review of this, and it looks at 5 different elements. So who will the park be servicing? It's important, given the unique ability to provide public access to the Mississippi River. It's important to take a look at who we're drawing to this property. Of course, our residents here in Cottage Grove, but the potential also for folks outside of the community. And then what will the park be classified as? So given the proposed total 37 acres plus the additional 12 acres, we'll talk about more in depth, that the DNR is proposing to purchase. It's quite a large piece of park, and so it's important to identify it as a community park, and this is separate from any future regional park that might be planned by the county on the island. Third, what are the important features that we would like to see at this park? We want to be able to provide active and passive uses for all different folks of all different ages and abilities at the park. And then that kind of lines up with number 4, and what are the special features of the park? What are the special features of the park going to be? Park pavilion, active play areas, are we going to have paved trails, natural trails? All of those items have been identified in the master plan that you see before you, again, because we want to be able to provide access to the Mississippi River for all folks. And then finally, it was important to take a look at what resources the city had for acquisition of additional acreage. Given as a part of development, the city is tied to that state statute requiring 10% of park dedication of the developable lands. And again, as we look at 37 acres, that's above and beyond that potential 10%. So we had to kind of look to other partners for acquisition of the additional acreage that you see before you. And again, the park planning process has really narrowed down using our consultant as a reference to specify what those amenities at this park might be. Again, a 7 or 8 month process has really narrowed that down, providing, I think the most important part is that river access. And I know Zach will speak to it, but providing that the water trails, I think, is a huge part. And this is just the start of using this community park and be able to connect to future regional parks on the island, things of that nature. It's very important as a part of this planning process. So again, as I had mentioned, the city is in fact working with its partners to come up with acquisition and funding opportunities for the additional acreages that they've proposed in this master plan. And we'll continue to work through that. I know we are working diligently with Washington County in hopes of acquiring legacy dollars to provide funding that way. And I know you've heard me mention a lot of public engagement, but I want to make very clear that we've spent the last 7 or 8 months really focusing on getting the message out that we are working through this master planning process, providing that online engagement opportunity, an open house here at City Hall. We've compiled all of the email correspondence that we've received as staff and made sure that all commissions who are reviewing this master plan have seen that those comments, questions, concerns before they're making a determination or a recommendation. And with that this evening, I can't stress enough that this is a very broad overview master plan. And there are next steps that are going to take place, one of those being this environmental assessment worksheet. But I think it's important that we recognize that it's important to evaluate the potential environmental impacts. And therefore, I have Angie Smith, who is an environmental planner with Bolton and Mink, who is just going to give an overview of the environmental assessment worksheet process, what that looks like, and that draft EAW that we are seeing at this point.
Thanks, Emily. And good evening, Commissioners. As Emily mentioned, my name is Angie Smith, Senior Environmental Planner with Bolton and Mink. And I just have a couple slides here to kind of talk through the concurrent environmental assessment worksheet process, make sure that we're all on the same page as far as the development piece of this. So what we've done is work closely with the city in reviewing the environmental assessment information that's come through from the developer. And just an overview of the EAW process. What this proposed development has done is it has triggered a mandatory environmental assessment worksheet per the Minnesota rules, the 4410, 4300, and there's a plethora of various topics that go through and identify when a mandatory environmental review process is required. And this one specific to subpart 19 for anybody following at home or on their phones, that is specific to residential development and a certain number of dwellings or units that created that trigger. So if, as part of an environmental review process, this could be an EAW, and that is the case for this particular development or proposed development. Other environmental review processes could be an environmental impact statement, again, depending on the level or depth and breadth of proposed development. Other opportunities come into play with alternative urban area-wide reviews, AUAR, for folks that are keeping track of alphabet soup at home. So those are various different types of review processes that come into play. But for this one, the environmental assessment worksheet, there were additional assessments that came into play as far as this review went in, and we're looking at geotechnical assessments. We're looking at wetland delineation on the proposed project site. We're looking at the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, which is different from an environmental assessment. So that's where we're talking about the potentially contaminated properties, hazardous materials, things like that. Also, with specific thresholds that come into play, a traffic impact study was triggered for this project, so that was completed as well. So again, what we're doing is working closely with city staff and going through every assessment that came in and reviewing that information for a comprehensive overview of the potential for environmental impacts. In addition to those additional assessments that occurred, there's also the early coordination out to some of the state agencies. So with SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, specific to cultural resources. So we're looking at historical, architectural, archaeological, all the above. So that is a piece of this. In addition to the DNR's Natural Heritage Information System. So that's looking at your rare, threatened, endangered species, sensitive ecological resources, things like that. And of course, with the scientific and natural areas right next door, that's going to be, one thing that we're paying close attention to. So I regularly, I'm not in school anymore, so I don't have to memorize stuff, but I do reference back to the EAW guidelines, and it's a great comprehensive review. It's step-by-step going through 20 different sections of all of these social, economic, environmental potential impacts, and looking at these assessments and how we're bringing that information to light. So as part of this, as we're working through it, I know you probably can't read this, and that's okay, but it is referenced and it's available through the Environmental Quality Board website. There's a really great guide. It's a quick reference guide, and there's information for citizens, there's information for practitioners, there's information for project proposers, all referenced on the EQB's website. And previously, when I got to participate and share some information with the city council, we were up in the top right-hand corner where we were still waiting for the final data submittal, et cetera. And then I believe it was last week's city council meeting, they did approved the draft EAW for distribution. So the reason that was a draft at the time is we did not have the final DNRs, that Natural Heritage Information System, the NHIS information, and we did receive that. I got a chance to look at that today, and that information was incorporated into the EAW. So at this point, we're now where that red box is located. So we're anticipating publishing this or pushing it out to the EQB monitor to trigger that 30-day public comment period, which will begin on November 29th, is anticipated right now. And that will go through December 29th. So a full 30 days for any public, agency, et cetera, comments to really dive into this and provide those comments back to city staff so we can take a closer look and look at some of those review periods. So following that 30-day public comment period, again, just process-wise, the city and we'll work closely with city staff to look at all the comments that came in from the public, from agency personnel, from commissioners, from whomever, and start what's called a record of decision, or it's basically looking at, is an environmental impact statement now required based on the level of review and information we've received. So we will develop and help city staff develop a record of decision that goes through the findings of fact, determining what the environmental or potential environmental impacts are as part of this proposed development. We'll ensure that any substantive comments that came in during that 30-day public review period are responded to, and ensure that then that declaration, whether an EIS is required or not, is moved forward for final city approval. So what I wanted to do tonight, just briefly, is talk through a couple of the sections that folks will have a chance to review here in another week or so. And what this is looking at really is that potential for environmental impacts, and for environmental here, we're talking about the social, the economic, and the sort of natural cultural side of things. And the goal of these projects is to look at a way to avoid impacts. If you can't avoid impacts, you want to minimize or mitigate for said impacts. So that's what this EAW is going to go through and provide, and then ensure that city staff, city council then has all the information they need to make an informed decision for further review. So for this particular EAW, again, just going to walk through a few of the areas. So for permits and approvals, Emily's been talking about the master planning process and the previous comprehensive plan. So this is just a piece of the larger, broader development process. So this is only one aspect of that. So all the permits and any other additional plans and mitigation requirements, approvals, et cetera, are going to happen in addition to this piece of the puzzle. So all those permits and approvals will be listed out in the EAW. If for any reason we miss something, then we'll make sure we capture that in that record of decision. So that's another really good part about this process, is that if we miss something, we will make sure that we have that input from the public, from our agency partners, and be able to capture that on the back end. For the comprehensive plan, there will be a couple amendments required. So this was previously under the transitional use area, so hence why the master plan process is going on now. And also that will trigger that comprehensive plan amendment requirement. Additionally, there's the Metropolitan Urban Service Area, the MUSA extension amendment that's going to come into play as part of this too on the utility side, and I'll get to that just in a minute. So on the geology section, what they're looking at in geology is really geology, topography, soils, things like that. So any of you soil, as far as a tree hugging, dirt worshiping, this is the dirt worshiping side of things. So we're looking at the geology. And with Cottage Grove in this area along the Mississippi River, karst topography does often come into play. As I was reviewing the information that came in here, we did not note any active karst on this particular project site, but there are some mitigation information pieces in the EAW itself that would plan for any unintentional discovery of karst that's maybe not currently mapped and things like that. So karst is one of those sensitive geological contexts that we want to make sure we're paying close attention to. On the water resources side, of course, we're right here along the Mississippi River, so we want to protect our water resources. And anytime we can create those buffers, improve our stormwater information, our stormwater mitigation pieces, so with an increase in impervious surface, the goal through stormwater management and all the requirements that come through from various permitting aspects is to reduce the rate to ensure that water quality and water quantity are not impacting your water resources, especially surface water resources. So that's going to be a big piece of this proposed development, and that comes into play for any proposed development. So working through all your required permits, through MRCCA, through the watershed district, through the cities, those aspects, those are always going to be those check boxes that have to come in. On the stormwater side of things, with the construction permits, the developer will also have to have a SWIP, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, completed, and make sure that is then approved by all required parties. And then I previously mentioned briefly on the utilities side, so with some of the settlement that's coming through from the PFAS, groundwater contamination, the proposal is to link this area to city water, wastewater. And in addition, it would then link to other residential areas as well. So again, improving some of the potential for groundwater contamination and getting the residences down in that area linked back to city water. On the ecological side, again, I mentioned briefly, we have the scientific and natural area right next door. So SNAs are typically known for their very sensitive context for a lot of the resources that come into play. So what we're looking at here is the various mitigation requirements, buffers, absence or presence of potentially rare, threatened, or endangered species. So all of that aspect is going to be written and gauged and shown in the EAW. And one of the recommendations is from the DNR, when we got that information just in the last couple days, is that the developer will be required to go do a survey, an ecological survey for rare, threatened, endangered. Again, looking at presence, absence, and then identifying proposed mitigation requirements as part of that. So this is everything from timing of tree removal for the northern long-eared bat. This is timing for rare bird species like the loggerhead shrike and other things along those lines. So we're really looking at timing of proposed development in addition to just location of proposed development. And then lastly, I want to hit on the transportation. Mentioned briefly, this did trigger a traffic impact study. So that will be presented as an appendix to this environmental review. And right now, there's only one proposed improvement along the road there is Gray Cloud Trail. As we're looking at realigning that a little bit just to improve safety in and out of this area. But other than that, there are no anticipated impacts or improvements suggested at this time from a transportation or traffic aspect. So those are just a few of the pieces of the puzzle that you're going to see. Again, there are a whole bunch of sections, and I really encourage any agency personnel, public folks that are interested to go through during that 30-day public review period and provide those comments back for us to review and ensure we're covering all that needs to be covered as part of this. So, and I'll be around for any questions that come up as we work through it. So thank you.
All right, and I will conclude. I know Angie touched on it quite a bit, but I just wanted to make clear where we're at in the process and what the next steps look like. And so again, the master planning process is the 10,000-foot look, very high level. As we work through, several more processes have to take place. Environmental assessment worksheet, comprehensive plan amendment, both of those processes need to happen before we will even see a separate application for a potential development. So again, this is the start. A lot of processes and a lot of applications will be before you in the coming months. But the focus this evening is, of course, that master plan. So with that, I will leave the recommendation and remind that we do need to hold a public hearing. Staff is available for any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? All right, at this time, I will open the public hearing. Anyone who wishes to speak for or against this application may come and address us from the podium there. Please state your name and address for the record, and again, you'll be limited to 3 minutes. So if you hear the bell, your time is up, and we'll ask you to sit down. All right, so at this time, the public hearing is open.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Lisa Mueller, and my address is N5001 810th Street in Ellsworth, Wisconsin. I'm one of your neighbors across the Cheddar Curtain. I don't live in Cottage Grove, but I have worked in Minnesota for the past 30 years in the field of land conservation. I've been a part of many incredible projects that led to the protection of thousands of acres of parks, trails, SNAs, and private conservation lands. I had the pleasure of attending the dedication of the Gray Cloud Dunes SNA some 23 years ago, and the area has remained a favorite to visit with family and friends. The common thread in all those successful conservation projects was a willingness on the part of project partners to set a bold vision and to imagine the possibility of creating a public open space on a grand scale. One such project was the Glacial Ridge Project in northwest Minnesota. Once owned by Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson, the former Crookston Cattle Company was comprised of some 25,000 acres. That's 25,000 acres of prairies, wetlands, cropland, and gravel mining areas. Early conversations with the landowner were about protecting only the native plant communities, but then a light bulb went off in our planning sessions. What if we protected the whole property, restored prairie and wetlands with the help of federal and state partners, and created a new national wildlife refuge? That property is now the Glacial Ridge National Wildlife Refuge, and all of us who worked on it are grateful to have had the opportunity to protect such a special place. A few months ago, I had the pleasure of touring the William H. Holton Conservation Area near Elk River with Cottage Grove and Elk River officials. Spirits were high as we together envisioned how a similar park could be created along the banks of the Mississippi River here in Cottage Grove. Yet, after many public input meetings, letters, and heartfelt messages from citizens about the desired future for the former Mississippi Dunes Golf Course, the current plan falls undeniably short. Housing developments are a dime a dozen, and many, like this Pulte proposal, are ill-conceived. They fail to consider the intangibles and the value associated with preserving wild nature. I close with a quote from author Barbara Kingsolver. I apologize, all of a sudden I have just a brutal pounding headache. People need wild places. Whether or not we think we do, we do. We need to be able to taste grace and know once again that we desire it. We need to experience a landscape that is timeless, whose agenda moves at the pace of speciation and glaciers. To be surrounded by a singing, mating, howling connection, commotion of other species, all of which love their lives as much as we do ours, and none of which could possibly care less about our economic status or our calendars. Wildness puts us in our place. It reminds us why, in those cases in which our plans might influence many future generations, we ought to choose carefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Wurst. I live at 8642 Grosse Pointe Avenue South here in Cottage Grove. I'm not a professional in land conservation or building houses. I am a community member, I'm a wife, I'm a mom to 3 little kids, and we all love the outdoors. We would love to have a place like this property just a few miles from our home, a place that we can go and explore and experience the wildlife, and that I could traipse through with my kids with maybe a natural playground there, and then some low-maintenance trails. A little easier to go around with 4-year-old twins than the SNA is. That's fun for me, but it's a little trickier with little kids. I'm having a hard time with this process. I haven't participated in city functions, politics, any of that before. This is all new to me. I started in May at the Parks Commission meeting because this property and the idea there is really important to me. I've attended a lot of meetings since. I've missed a lot of bedtimes with my kids. They, for the most part, understand, but my daughter, was blocking the door tonight, but I'm still here because it's important for the future for her. How many of your master plans come with a memo from the city attorney? I don't know if that's common or not. How many times does a city hold an open house and a public engagement period for something like this, where it is almost unanimous with all of the response that the community wants more park space, less houses, if any houses, the area to be kept natural? And the city did not respond to that in any way that I can see in all of these documents. It says that they upped it to 40 acres for the parkland, but that's not an increase from what it was before the public engagement period. So hearing from the public that we want more park space, I didn't see any feedback that said, I love this as it is. More houses, more standard single-family homes on this beautiful property. That wasn't there. For this property, there's 37 trains per day coming through there. They're loud. It's the MSP flight path. It's loud. Are people going to want to live here? Are the values of those homes going to rise? Is that why that it's just a standard Pulte home development and not a higher end housing development on a riverfront area? I think that's something to consider.
All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
And I know you already said your name, but if we can get your name and address again, please.
Yeah, no problem. My name's Adam Grams. I live at 10655 Great Cloud Trail South. I guess I got a few questions. One, just echoing what the last lady had said here was, with the open forums, I'd like to see, I wasn't able to see in the master plan any changes to that came out of those forums, any response from the community. It seems that this has been set in stone from the beginning, what the direction is. That's a question, I don't know if I can get an answer on that. What actually changed after the public open forum? I think the one thing that the community and the neighbors around that area have been saying is that we don't want a huge development there. And, even with the rezoning of the property, like, who wants this rezoned? I don't know a lot of people that do. I mean, outside of the city council and the developer and the owner, obviously, but outside of those people, who wants this area rezoned into 0.4 acre sized from the, minimum 3 acre? That's quite a bit difference. And especially when we're looking at protecting the environment, as we were saying, just jamming more people in there does not seem like the right choice. And then the other question would be, when it comes to alerting the people that live around there, I didn't find out that everyone on Great Cloud Trail South the goal is to get them on city water and sewer. When are we supposed to be alerted on this? How are we supposed to find this information out? So I think then I guess the other thing too would be to ask that if we are looking at putting more utilities in the area, trying to get higher internet service in that area as well, right? The DSL is not suffice back there. And I think even with looking at the PFASs and the contaminants that are in there, a lot of the people down there that have wells, including me, we have carbon filters that are provided by the state, and this removes them. And so, going on city water and city sewer that's not a benefit to the residents that already have the stuff, that invested in our own septic tanks, that have the filters down there. So that's all I got to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Just before you start there, I'm going to address what Mr. Graham said. He wanted to know if he was going to get answers. We're going to take public comment, and staff and I, and myself, and the other members of the commission are writing down the questions that are being asked, and we'll have staff comment on those then after public comment's closed, all right? So you will get answers. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sharon O'Boyle. I live at 9300 Great Cloud Trail South, Great Cloud Island Township. And there have been comments made by some city council members that only people that live in 55016 have any say on this. This affects all of us. There are only two ways into Mississippi Dunes, either through Cottage Grove or through St. Paul Park and Great Cloud Island Township. That means any additional, if there were to be a housing development, that means a lot more traffic on the roads. And I don't see Cottage Grove offering to pick up the tab on all of that, on St. Paul Park roads and Great Cloud Island roads. My grandma owned that land before it became Mississippi Dunes. My family did not sell it until they found a buyer that would not harm the environment, that would enhance the environment. The type of golf course that Mississippi Dunes is what's called a Scottish type of golf course. And that means that the land was not changed. The land was kept natural. One other thing that I wanted to bring up that I took right from the Washington County principles, local land use plans should help promote Washington County principles, quote, to preserve the existing natural resources, retain existing character, and provide a high quality of life. Then the Land and Water Legacy Program, which is also should be taken into consideration. Their goal is to protect and enhance and provide access to natural resources, land, water, and open space through conservation and stewardship. The biggest thing that we need to do with Mississippi Dunes is preserve that space. It is open space, bottom line. And we know that there is climate change, that's a fact. And to put another housing development and more paved roads will just make that worse. You've got the SNA on one side of Mississippi Dunes, you've got the Great Cloud Island Regional Park on the other side. It makes sense for that 180 acres to be included in that one whole parcel. That would be, a fantastic gem for Cottage Grove. It doesn't need to be financed by Cottage Grove. That can be a collaboration between county, state.
Thank you.
I'm against any housing development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Nedry. I reside at 7764 Jasmine Avenue South in Cottage Grove. I wasn't planning on speaking this evening, but as I have at many meetings, feel compelled to bring up some points that I think are really relevant. One of the first is a question that I have. If the EAW has a 30-day review and comment period that runs, I saw today, from 11/29 to 12/29, and the city council is set to vote on the master plan on December 1, that seems to be an immediate conflict. I don't understand how that can get resolved. I don't know if anyone wants to address it now or some other time, but it just seems like there is a conflict there. 11/29, 12/29, that's 30 days. How can a vote happen on December 1? The second thing, thanks to my friend, is from the Cottage Grove Comprehensive Plan land use. Looks like this is page 22. It states that transitional planning areas, areas designated traditional planning areas, which I believe is what is in discussion, part of this evening, need additional planning efforts prior to establishing future land use designations. Master plans will be completed for each transitional planning area, which includes the Mississippi Dunes, the area west of the golf course and the train tracks, and the lower Great Cloud Island. Allowable uses in areas designated transitional planning areas include parks, commercial agriculture, and residential uses on lots of a minimum of 20 acres. Parks, 1, commercial agriculture, and residential uses on lots of a minimum of 20 acres. I just want you to take that into consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Members of the City of Cottage Grove Planning Commission. My name is Marilyn Witzel, 10649 Gray Cloud Trail in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. Many people have spoken, sent emails on their feelings about the Mississippi Dunes process during this Mississippi Dunes property during this process. It is very apparent that we do not want high-density or medium-density housing on that property. It is now zoned for a house on every 3 acres. What is wrong with that? I have heard a number of times at the various meetings concerns of the property owner. What about the concerns of the citizens down on Gray Cloud? My concerns are the infrastructure in the area with 200 more homes that will bring more traffic on 103rd Street going underneath the railroad bridge. As we know from the clubhouse fire, that the fire trucks could not go under the bridge, so they had to all go through St. Paul Park to respond to that fire. That is a major problem for response time. By the way, how is that investigation going? I am very concerned about who will be paying for the redoing of 103rd and Gray Cloud Trail and the roads that go into the development. We already paid our fair share when we were assessed for Gray Cloud Trail when it was redone a few years ago. I have been told that the property owners on Gray Cloud will not be assessed for the sewer and water for the development. I wish I could totally believe that. I would like to see that in writing. I just hope the members of the commission, city council, and city officials listens to the citizens of Cottage Grove when they voice their concerns. You represent us, so hear what we have to say and not what just a landowner or a developer may want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, council members. Thank you very much for hearing me. My name is Bonnie Matter. I live at 6649 Inskip Avenue South in Cottage Grove, and I'm going to have to read this because I don't want to run over 3 minutes, and I really think I have some things to share with you. First of all, context. There have been so many maps that I have seen that have related to this site. But I think what you really need to see is an overall map of the entire site, and I mean Mississippi Dunes, SNA, and this new industrial site, and how they butt up against each other. That's the first thing. The new site will be 3.5 million square feet, and it has a 252 acre footprint. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go to the site. You know, like okay, so you've driven it, you know all about that. And then have you been to the SNA site? You don't have to answer yet. But if you go to the SNA site and you get out, you walk it, you're going down a slope. So as you head down to the river, you're going down a slope. As I said, this is going to butt up to the Mississippi Dune site. And one of the questions I have is it realistic to think that any amount of existing stormwater management or mitigation plan will be able to address the industrial site's future needs. The excess water will need to run somewhere, and usually that's downhill. The Mississippi Dunes land is serving as a natural buffer is critical to this area. We would be building a new residential development in an industrial area. Traffic, I have not seen documented anywhere the anticipated daily counts for semis, truck trailers, trucks, and cars. This traffic will have an impact on the Mississippi Dunes residents. The traffic study provided for the Mississippi Dunes Master Plan is not complete and does not contain anything related to this. Traffic flow. Initially, the plan is to have the semi-truck trailers, trucks head south on 100th Street over to Innovation Road, take the roundabout at Innovation Road and exit onto Highway 61, where they will probably head north back to the freeway. Okay, I don't know how realistic that is and if they're really going to do that, but this may have an impact on that whole area. Railroad corridor, 37 trains per day that run through this area. That was according to something that I read on the master plan. Again, I'm missing a map. Allowable top speed is unknown. I was able to catch one of the trains on Saturday at Innovation Road, double-decker freight cars, and there were at least 75 to 100 cars. I had to wait there for a while to, and this, I'm going to finish with,
Nope, thank you. It's 2 or 3 minutes.
may I claim someone else's time, please?
Ms. Mathers, I'm going to have to ask you to take a seat. Thank you.
It was disrespectful not to give us more time to plan, to read this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am Christine Grams. You heard my husband speak. I live at 10655 Gray Cloud Trail. And I don't normally do this, but, in the beginning, I was pretty neutral about this whole plan. I wanted to have an open mind. I thought, hey, this might even have a positive impact on our property values. We might even get better internet. Who knows? Get city water, that might be good. I don't know. But I started hearing from people a lot of concerns and a lot of concerns about the environmental impact. And, I grew up in a farming community, farming family, so it was all about, land conservation. How do we protect the land, protect erosion? Started reading, and pretty soon I was like, the list for all the reasons why this is just a bad idea to build here, to build to this density of housing didn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make sense. I really want to ask that we allow for more time to really consider the impacts, because a lot of times what we're finding when we build on areas so close to the river, we build to such a high extent, we're finding that there's negative impacts that were, 5-10 years down the road. Things like flooding downriver. There's a community, just on the other side of the SNA that, can very well be impacted by this because they're on the lowland. We keep talking about how we want to preserve and help the environment, and we're looking at this plan, and we've got 6.9 acres of wooded forest that is going to be taken down, 3.8 acres of brush and grassland that is essential to the rusty patched bumblebee, which is disappearing very, very quickly, much quicker than anybody has anticipated. We haven't talked about what the impact is of not just the houses, but adding this density of people to an area that has very poor access to begin with, or the pollution that will be caused by those people living there, and to the critical habitat that exists there, to the birds, to the bees, to the bats, all of that. And this is listed as critical habitat, not just by the DNR, but also by the National Audubon Society. And, anyway, I would just really push that, we look at things like the Michigan Dunes and how the building was there. They've actually got a $15 million plan set in place for recommendations on how to build on dunes.
Thank you.
I am done. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Corinne Mars, and I live at 10647 Gray Cloud Trail South here in Cottage Grove. I work as a historical researcher and author and focus on 19th century American and Minnesota history. And for a number of years, I have served on the advisory committee for historic preservation here in Cottage Grove. Members of my family have lived in this area for more than 250 years. My great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, was a brother to Gray Cloud woman number 1, who was the wife of James Aird. And that also meant that he was the uncle to Gray Cloud woman number 2, who was the wife of Hazen Moores. But since that time, many things have changed. And in those days, you could drink the water out of the river, and land was plentiful. But today, water filters are needed to make the water safe enough to drink. And I have 2 large water filters in my basement, as do many of my neighbors and fellow residents. But it's the land that is especially scarce and precious. It is its precious commodity. The former Mississippi Dunes golf site should not have any houses on it. It should not have any buildings on it. It should be left in the beautiful natural state that it is today. In my opinion, this housing shouldn't even be considered as an option because it is not the best use of this scarce and precious commodity called land. Even though we know that there is going to be money made from this housing development, and not just lots of dollars, but probably millions of dollars. And many of us that are neighbors, our quality of life is going to be changed forever. This land needs to be protected as a green park space with public access for boating, as a place of refuge for migratory birds and wildlife, and as a place to enjoy nature. In the years to come, many more will be able to enjoy this land more than who will be living on this land in this housing. It is a place of peace. If you have walked through there or just driven by it, just looking down, gazing down on it from the top of the hill by the old Mississippi Dunes Practice Center, it's a beautiful place to see. We need to protect it today or it is going to be gone forever. So choose an act of political bravery and integrity to choose to protect and preserve this unique property for Cottage Grove. We will not see another one like it because there are no more spots like this anywhere in Cottage Grove. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Colleen O'Connor Toberman with Friends of the Mississippi River, 101 East 5th Street in St. Paul. Like all of your residents here tonight, FMR would like to see the Mississippi Dunes Master Plan prioritize more public parkland and less private development. The potential here to provide recreational benefits and ecological benefits is so uniquely high. As our last speaker said, there's nothing else like this left in your city. And it seems like a lot of your residents share the same vision. In the engagement process, the resident support for more parkland and less development was nearly unanimous. And they're well-founded in that belief. As you know, the site is the city's top priority in its River Access Strategy report. And for that kind of park to offer full recreational experience along the river, it needs to be a large community park, not something so small that it won't serve people from across the city. We've been told many times that the city can't do anything to secure additional parkland if the property owner prefers to develop housing here instead. But the city is not required to rezone this property to accommodate something a developer wants and this intensity of housing development. Your comprehensive plan doesn't guarantee a particular layout for this property. It states that more planning is needed. And now that the city is doing more planning, it seems to be ignoring resident feedback in that process. Of course, compensating the owner at fair market value would be an important part of any process for acquiring more parkland. FMR has made repeated offers over the last few years to help the city with this funding if it would choose to pursue it. However, we hear a lot of talk from the city instead about a kind of a distant hope of a park on Gray Cloud Island. We certainly would love to see that park someday as well, but that might be decades before the mining ends and before that site is cleaned up. The cleanup will be expensive. That island will be subject to these same debates about housing versus parkland. Gray Cloud Island is an industrial mine, whereas Mississippi Dunes could be restored with a relatively light touch. And rather than waiting decades for a riverfront park, you could have one here and now. I'm also concerned that the City Council apparently plans to vote on this master plan without getting feedback from the city's Parks Commission. At the last meeting, the Parks Commission requested more time so that they could hear feedback from the Planning Commission and see the draft environmental assessment worksheet. I don't think that they realized that the council didn't plan to wait for that for their recommendation before moving ahead with their own vote on December 1st. The Parks Commission doesn't meet again until December 13th, and they were anticipating reviewing this plan there. So here we are, we're nearing the end of a planning process in which community feedback has been largely disregarded. The city's own Parks Commission hasn't taken a vote. And so I would encourage you to not recommend approval of a master plan that is so out of sync with community vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment?
Hi, my name is Brittany Dirtsu. I live at 10417 Gray Cloud Trail. I heard about this meeting last minute. I wasn't even planning to speak, but I have to say I'm heartbroken. I grew up on that land. I used to run and play with my sisters on that land, and now I have a 4-year-old daughter, and we go out there and look at all the wildlife. We see the birds, we walk to the river, and there have been an increase in birds, and she said, "Mommy, what's happening?" I said, "Well, all the land around us is getting developed. So the birds are coming here. The deer are coming here. They have nowhere else to go." And I just can't stand the thought of another tan house, another 100, 200 tan houses behind my house on such beautiful, precious land. I heard a couple people talk about the history of this land, and I think the history is important. And I think we should keep it natural. I think we should listen to everybody else who's been speaking and keep it like it is, and vote a little bit more put our vote on the side of nature instead of the side of money, and look at what you have. Listen to the lady from the Friends of the Mississippi River and try and work with some people. It sounds like we need more time. And it sounds like you guys need to level up your vision of the city instead of just filling it with more houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Last chance. All right, at this time, I'm going to close public comment on this application. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight and give your comments, regardless of how you fell on the position. Please take note that this time the public hearing is closed. There is no further public comment on this application. All right, so we're going to try to get through some of the questions that people had raised in their comments from staff. And so I think the first one I had, and I don't know who wants to take this, Emily, maybe, is there was an original plan out there, and then there were some workshops and community meetings, and now we're here today, obviously, a couple months down the road. What has changed based on the community comments and the workshops that council's had and that staff have had with the community?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, I think we'll probably start with the Parks element with our Parks Director. He can talk through some of the elements as it evolved through that public comment process. So I think we'd probably start with that element first, and that way there he can maybe address some of the residents' concerns as well.
Okay.
So in terms of the parks, thank you, Commissioners. In terms of the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Master Plan for this site, most of the public engagement revolved around the 40 acres that are preserved here, trying to identify what people wanted in this community park. Some of the land to the west had been, so we had added some additional land to the west of the site, which offered improved access to the site from the roadway and keeping any access kind of straightforward to the site as opposed to going through having to go through any neighborhoods or having any access issues with that as far as getting to the park. We try to keep as much of the area to the west active as possible and try to make that as condensed as possible so that everything to the east connecting to the SNA area was preserved natural open space. So what you'll see, everything to the east, the majority of the acreage is natural trails. There's also paved trails, paved and natural trails. And then also the key element of the Parks Master Plan, the number one priority was to acquire all the land along the Mississippi River. So what you're seeing is all that land along the Mississippi River is preserved park and open space. Now, as far as the Parks Commission, they've been kind of working in this box of this 40 acres, and that's through the MRCCA ordinance and the Park Dedication Ordinance. So that's been the Parks Commission's role is when they're analyzing the Park Master Plan is to talk about what the current ordinance says, should there be a future development, the land that they'd be working with. So really the plan has been fairly consistent. We've worked with the DNR, had multiple conversations with them. Their number one priority was this 12 acres along the east side, which they've already been maintaining as dry prairie. So we've been working with them to try to acquire that property for them, and then obviously making our connection to that as well and preserving as much open space as possible. I can stand for any other questions the commission might have as well.
Any questions for park staff? No? Oh, Commissioner Britton.
Can you comment, Zach, on, in a typical development, what is required? And I know this is more of on the planning side of things, but this might be a good time to, it seems like this is a much larger percentage of this developable area than we would normally have access to for a project of this size.
Sure, Commissioner Britton. 10% is the starting point. With the MRCCA ordinance, there's a few extra acres in that. I think we're working at about 14 acres right now. This current site is about 40 acres, and that was at the direction of the commission made a recommendation to City Council, and City Council also made a recommendation that we make it a 40-acre park. And once again, master plan for the park, not for the entire development, but looking at the site as a whole. So that'd be double what a typical park would look like. And I should mention the reason that was chosen was because we wanted to make sure it was a community park. It was very clear from council and the Parks Commission that this should be a community park. This isn't for the neighborhood. Whatever the neighborhood is, whether that's a new development or the existing neighbors, this is for the community, and that's why I was talking about that public access road too. That, we want to make sure the community and visitors have easy access to this park. So that's why that 40 acres is a good number. 40 acres is pretty relevant in terms of other community parks in Cottage Grove, Oakwood, Highlands, and parks like that.
And that doubling of what we would normally get over that 10% is going to require funding from other sources, correct?
Correct, yes. We would get 10% through park dedication, and then the city would be responsible for funding the rest of the acquisition.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
The next question I had written down, Ryan, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As I was tracking through, Public Works Director Ryan Burfine, dealing with stormwater infrastructure, I thought I'd cover all those kind of in one shot. They were mentioned in multiple sections, so I'll kind of go through the list I have. If there's anything you feel I've missed, feel free to mention that. The first one I'll talk about is stormwater. This is a master plan. It's very high level, but stormwater is mentioned several times. Stormwater is by far one of the most regulated things when it comes to development. There are city rules, there are local watershed rules, and there are state rules for the MPCA. The MPCAs are more status quo, maintain existing, right? Whatever the amount of water leaving the site is, the amount of phosphorus, which is a known issue for water bodies, maintain that, don't go over that. The watershed, the city, we require pretty major reductions actually. So from what an existing state is, we require very significant reductions in the phosphorus, in the volume of water, not just the rate, like how fast it comes off, what you think about flooding, the actual volume, and that's where we talk about infiltration of that stormwater. Certainly there was mention of how the Mississippi River has gotten worse. Well, development did not have 20, 30 years ago those type of rules, and now we do. They're looked at very detailed through the plan review, through an actual development. The master plan's more high level. They're monitored during construction and after construction. The state is very clear on what we have to do as a city to make sure they stay in place, they stay maintained, and they actually audit us to ensure that's happening. So, like I said, really with development in the current days and current rules, you actually see improvement in that stormwater runoff. There was also discussion about the roadway improvements and who pays for those. That has come up in the past. It comes up with a lot of developments, and really the process is development pays for itself. So when we look at realigning Gray Cloud Trail, 103rd Street area, that is something that the development would be responsible for. When you look at bringing water and sewer to this area, that's something the development would be responsible for. As a city, we have some plans to oversize, make things bigger, for different reasons. That's something that the city pays for through other development funds, not local residents. And then there was some discussion and question about, local residents being hooked up. In the staff presentation, there was mention of the PFAS. That's really specific to the wells in the area, and there was mention of the filters that residents have today. Those are funded by the state through 3M. There was a 3-year process recently wrapped up called the 3M Settlement Agreement, where the state identified future neighborhoods to connect. In the final plan, this was not a final neighborhood to connect, but it was one that was deemed that needed monitoring. It does have PFAS. It does have the homes with the filters, and that's very much a state decision. The DNR and the PCA, they're the trustees of that money, and if they determine that, as a state, it's more cost effective for this money that has to be used across the whole East Metro to connect into city water, that's a decision that they make, and then they work with the city to implement. It's something that we have done in the River Acres neighborhood and the Granite Avenue neighborhood, and we're doing Goodview Avenue right now in the north end of town. So while it's not in the final plan, that's why there hasn't been discussion with the residents yet. It is definitely something that was identified to be monitored. Let's see here. Looking at other questions that were brought up. There's a question about flooding, very much similar to the stormwater discussion I had, that we actually look at a reduction in the volume and the rates of that stormwater. And I believe that's everything that I'm seeing from an infrastructure perspective, but if there's any questions the commission has, I'm happy to answer them.
Commissioner Britton.
Ryan, in regards to stormwater, I know that the watershed as well as the city, as you mentioned, have increased their strictness on the rules for all of that to help mitigate those things. Can you highlight a little bit on on-site storage and how things have changed versus not letting water leave specific sites, whether it's the industrial park or residential neighborhoods or things along those lines? I know things have changed drastically over the years. Can you highlight a little bit about, instead of just, hey, we're making things better, how those things impact some of the rules that we have on these new developments?
Yep, certainly, Commissioner Britton. So very specifically, how we manage that is there's two things. There's large stormwater ponds that you see that actually allow water to come in and go out at a much slower rate. And then there's the infiltration basins. Those are probably the biggest key, infiltration basins. So you actually allow that water to go back into the ground into the groundwater to recharge it, which is a really big goal of our local watershed and the state. And phosphorus I mentioned, so phosphorus is, it's in fertilizer, it's something that causes algae blooms. We actually require an 80% reduction from what leaves the site today. So whatever leaves today has to be reduced by 50%. 80% is the sediment, so a 50% reduction in the phosphorus. So those are some of the real things we look at. And we have a very comprehensive plan of the entire city, and we're looking at stormwater and where it goes. I will actually mention, as you mentioned the industrial site, there was a specific question about the industrial site. That actually would not flow through the SNA. It would not flow this direction. That actually flows to the east out through some 3M property, eventually down to the river, right? Everything goes to the river, but that would not flow this direction. And with that industrial property, they are held to the same rules. So they would have to reduce the amount of water leaving the site and reduce the amount of phosphorus to make it better in the long run.
Thank you.
Other questions for?
I do. I have one.
Commissioner Fisher.
So one of the community members had mentioned the fire when it happened on site and how everything had to go around through St. Bell Park. Can you talk a little bit about that bridge and what kind of problems that may or may not cause? And talk about maybe the response time for other Gray Cloud residents that may have, emergency or fire need?
Yep. Commissioner Fisher, I can answer the first part because I'm very familiar with that, and then we also have our police captain here if there's any questions on response time. But there was a memo in the packet from Public Safety, and it's something I've worked with over the years. Our fire engines and ambulance are able to go under the bridge. It's just the aerial ladder truck that has to go around. But it is the fire engines and ambulance that can go under. I don't know if there's anything Greg wants to add on that question, but.
Hi, Greg Renzel. I'm a Deputy Director of Public Safety, so I oversee the police division. I'm not going to pretend to be a fire person, but I can answer some of the questions.
That's just what was brought up was the fire, because of the fire.
Right. So I can tell you that if the development goes forward, it'll obviously have fire hydrants, which will actually improve our fire safety ratings in that area, because right now with any rural residential firefighting, you're actually taking and bringing fire trucks in. They're dropping big, huge water pools, basically, and then you're siphoning out of that pool into the truck and then putting out the fire. So you're literally moving hundreds of thousands of gallons of water from one hydrant to another, where if the development goes through and water and sewer is available, the firefighting capacity and capabilities will actually improve dramatically. Not a little bit, dramatically improve the capacity there. As far as police services, I think some of the questions relative to response times, we cover 36.5 square miles. We're not in one specific area at any given time. We cover that area all the way down through the Nelson plant on a daily basis. So our response times are spread out, just like our community is, and we ensure that we have appropriate personnel in those areas when they're needed. So hope that answers the questions.
What's the process to analyze if you need more coverage in a certain area of the city? I know this is obviously going to be extended for a little bit of time because we're only at the master plan part of it right now, but what does that look like as far as being able to respond to that area and so on and so forth? So
that's an interesting conversation, right? Because there's a couple different matrices you can use when determining staffing citywide. So we go through that on a regular basis. We've used a lot of how many officers per thousand ratio over the years. We use different ratios when we were a police paramedic service, so we had higher ratio. Now that our firefighter, EMT paramedics are now handling the EMS, we've diminished that percentage. But that's really based on, that matrix right now. However, that's maybe not the best matrix. So we're constantly developing and implementing new ways to look at police services and then what our real necessity is. As far as an area, when they get more homes, we just spread out our coverage. But I can tell you, I've been at the police department for over 27 years. Our patrol staffing hasn't changed dramatically in those years. We've went from right around 25,000 residents to just under 40,000 now. So they have increased, but we staff during our high times. So we look at on a yearly basis, when are we busy, and then we add power shifts. So you have a 24-hour coverage, but yet you overlap during those high times until 3 o'clock in the morning. And then you go down from there, depending on calls. But we also have a great relationship with Washington County, St. Paul Park, to provide mutual aid assistance, including Woodbury to our north. So we work pretty much seamlessly throughout the South Metro to provide all that coverage. So.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for engineering or planning staff? Commissioner Britton.
Emily. So there was a question about transitional planning area and what could be done there. It could be ag, homes of 20 acres minimum. It's my understanding that that's what you could do there when it's classified as transitional planning area. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Britton, you are correct.
So those are the things that you could do there now, not what they would be or some restriction of what that zoning could be changed to.
Correct. That's the permitted use prior to a master plan being completed.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think there was a couple I just want to touch again. On that transitional area planning, that's the start, that we work through the master plan, which is before you this evening. When we start talking about rezoning, that's a completely separate application that will come. Again, we have that EAW and any subsequent applications that will follow that process.
In conjunction with that, there was a question about, the city council voting in December and Parks Commission needing an opportunity or wanting to hear what they have to say. And from my understanding, this is the master plan review, 50,000, 10,000 foot view, big picture. There's a lot of work to refine the details that are going to go into this. The city council would only be voting on the big picture concept to move forward so that the rest of the pieces could begin. The EAW could be completed and anything in there could trigger other things that would be necessary to occur and other fine tuning and planning that would be required. And right now, there wouldn't be enough definition for the Parks Commission to really provide a solid impact, or, well, not impact, but an opinion on something because it's just too general. So my anticipation is that as this moves forward, the Parks Commission would then have the opportunity, as well as these other pieces, to form enough to provide more detail for the next steps in the process. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Britton, I couldn't have said it better myself. You are correct. That is the process to follow. A lot more detailed review.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff?
I have one.
Commissioner Knable.
So on the SNA expansion, I know a lot of people are talking about, single-family housing and just all that kind of is going into this piece, but did the DNR want or wanted to take more than 12 acres? Is that something they were interested in?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, in regards to that, we had a specific conversation with the DNR. We asked them to specifically highlight the elements that they had the highest priority and interest in obtaining. Based upon the images and the graphics that they provided in our dialogue, they only specified their desire for this 12.3 acre parcel. They did not desire or indicate that they have a willingness to acquire additional land as part of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? That was all the ones I had to. No? All right. Thank you. Discussion from the commission. Commissioner Britton.
I'd just like to say that, again, this is big picture. You're in the airplane looking down. We need to get a better idea of road infrastructure, utility infrastructure, environmental assessments. All of that stuff needs to be happening. To have a master plan, in my opinion, gives us the ability to start focusing on those areas and set the general direction of what the property should be doing in the long term. Gives the developer an opportunity to come up with a refined plan to fit more within what our expectation is. And it gives the other processes an opportunity to begin and provide enough detail to interlink with these other processes such that they can provide value. A landowner has to have the ability to make reasonable use of the properties that they own. It isn't in our purview to restrict or tell them what they can and can't do, but we can provide a guideline for what that happens is what we feel would be appropriate and conducive to interaction with areas near there. So the master plan process, I think, is an important step. We will get more detail later. This property has been available for years. Anybody could go on in and buy it. The DNR could have gone in and buy it. The state could have gone in and bought it. The county could have gone in and bought it. They have other areas that they want to focus their interest in potentially. So they had that opportunity. I see the benefit of the master plan here is allowing us to acquire a significantly more parkland than what we would typically see. And that's come from great work from the Parks Commission and their strategic planning and saying what we want to have in these areas. As a community, there has to be a balance. We can only do so much in different areas. I see this master plan as providing the ability to help conform those things to what the comprehensive plan has guided and directed us to, as well as providing the ability to fine-tune that as things go forward. So I think this is a good step in the process. It is by far the end of the process. There's a lot more work to be done. And I don't see our attention to this going away at any point in time. I think that we're going to be looking at it harder as it goes. The input that we get from the community is very important. So as we tweak things and guide things, we don't have the ability to do everything that we want to do. There's limits. And it isn't our job or the city's job to micromanage every single detail. So there's only so much we can do, but we can work together. And if there's ideas on how to coexist and to make things work better for everybody, then I'd suggest we put our energy and our focus there to make a better concept and a better end game for the whole project in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make a couple comments and then I'll let anyone else speak who wants to. But I forgot I do have Commissioner Rasmussen wasn't able to be here tonight. He did provide a response that he wanted to have read in the record, so I'm going to do that. But I also want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Regardless of how you fall on this issue, regardless if you think this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, this is democracy in action. Local government is going to have more impact on your life than any other form of government. And the fact that you show up tonight means that you care. Just like everybody else who's sitting here up on the dais. We're all members of this community who give up our Monday nights once a month to come and do this, listen to citizens, and do what we think is right for the city. And so the fact that you showed up tonight too means you have the same goal in mind. Now, how we get there, we may differ. But as long as we're respectful like we were tonight, because this is going to be back in front of us again. So I'm expecting to see all of you here again. But as long as we're all respectful about the process and understand what the limits of government are, this can be a project I think that everyone can get along with. Now, Commissioner Rasmussen wanted me to put this into the record. Mississippi this is a special and unique property, and I'm glad to see the city working on a master plan for this area. Parks and open space are one of my favorite features in the city, and I'm happy to see the plan incorporated close to 40 acres of park space along the river frontage. This has the potential to be an amazing public space in our city. Regarding the residential uses shown on the conceptual plan, they appear to be consistent with our current standards and conform to the comprehensive plan. I am reading plenty of public comments wanting to leave the property as is and restricting development. I understand their ask, although fully understand this is private property and the owner has every right to use as they like, assuming they stay within the city guidelines. With this property recently being on the market, all private parties and organizations had an opportunity to purchase this property and to use as they see fit. I'm glad to see this plan maximizing the amount of park and open spaces and placing these areas along the waterfront. And then finally, I just want to add my comments, and I'll quote Ms. O'Connor Toberman, who was nice enough to come and give her opinion tonight, that in the future, we're not required to rezone. The problem is if we don't have a legal basis to not rezone, that's where we get in trouble. And just like Commissioner Britton said, the landowner has a constitutional right. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says that a landowner has due process rights. And if the city decides, you know, these are the rules, but we don't like the rules right now, so we're just going to ignore them, that's a violation of someone's constitutional rights. And so while I think we'd all like to see more public space, I think we'd all like to see, you know, more natural areas, we also have to make sure that we all follow the laws of this country and the rules of the city when we do these applications. And that means respecting people's property rights, whether or not you agree with what they want to do with their property. And we can have a hand in this and get some more parkland like we've had on the master plan. We can help kind of guide and say this is what we'd like to see. Or we could go the other route and say we're not going to do this at all, and maybe we lose all ability to have a park there. Maybe we lose all ability to have any indication as to what we'd like to have on this property. So based on what I've seen right now, I believe that this is a good starting point. I would be interested to see what happens. I want to see more public comment to see if we can make some changes to make more people happy, to make sure the developer has a good idea of what this land is going to turn into. But I think at this point, we're at a good starting spot, and I'd like to see where we go from here.
You guys said everything I was going to say. I just want to say thank you myself for everybody who came tonight. And I spent hours reading through everybody's letters and survey responses, and I just really appreciate the community input. And I'm also really proud of our city and our staff here and just the depth and the amount of work that's gone into this. I'm really proud to live in Cottage Grove and to be a part of this community. So thank you to everybody who put all this information together. Thank you to the community for everyone's input. I appreciate that. And I'm just proud to sit here with the city of Cottage Grove.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo that as well. I spent quite a few hours going through the staff report here. Just wanted to say thank you for that information, and, you know, thank you guys for coming out and speaking on this. It really gives, you know, us more vision to what we are looking at on paper tonight, so appreciate it.
Commissioner Wright.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't see is some of the diligence that is put into this stuff in the background, right? It's easy to come here and you see some of the work, but there's a lot of research by the staff here, by other members. My Sunday is taken up by these things. I dedicate that time because I owe this to you guys. They owe this to you guys, right? I really like this plan. I know you probably don't want to hear that, but it protects, whether you like to hear it or not, it protects that shoreline. It really does. This isn't like a Tony Stark putting a helipad, like, you know, off the lake, like, or the river. You know, it's deliberate, and I think this is a good way forward, so.
Commissioner Britton.
You know, something that I did forget to mention is that, you know, the previous owner for this had grandiose plans of all the different things that could happen here. Could be an event center. We could have had WeFest in Cottage Grove, which I think would have been, personally, from a non-zoning and planning perspective, unfathomable. So, but I see this as a better direction, you know, and what it could have been significantly different than what we're seeing here today. And I see this as definitely something more in conjunction with the way that our community has been developing and the things that work well together. Thank you.
Just one more thing.
Right.
Keep doing what you're doing. Be involved. But I've seen time and time the city council members and the staff, these things morph into different things. You know, this isn't a end-all say-all tonight at all, just like what they're saying, right? But you coming in here and actually giving your feedback, yes, you are being heard. You might not feel like it sometimes, I get that, but you are. And that will drive future decisions as we go forward with this and the various next steps that we go through, so.
Any other comments? All right. This time I'd be looking for a motion then.
I'd move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the master plan by Commissioner Britton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Wright. Any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0. All right, moving on to item number 7, approval of the Planning Commission minutes from October 25th, 2021. Does anyone have any amendments or corrections to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'd look for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve?
Motion from Commissioner Fisher, how about a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Knable. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right, moving on to reports, 8.1 recap of November City Council minutes.
Members of the Planning Commission, just to review from the November City Council meetings, there were a couple items that were before you previously. On the November 3rd City Council meeting, Marine 61 and Sports for their conditional use permit and site plan amendment was approved, as well as Glen Grove Industrial Park 9th Edition and the preliminary and final plat. So that was roughly at 95th and Jamaica. Then at the November 17th City Council meeting, there were 2 items that you had previously heard, 80th Street Crossing, which was a minor subdivision and preliminary and final plat, as well as appointing our new Planning Commission Chair were 2 items on that. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Dennis.
All right, thank you, Director Costello, and thank all of you tonight for the great work that you do. As you know, I very much appreciate the volunteerism, makes a major difference. Also appreciate those folks who came tonight, took some time out of their busy life here to talk about their desires or dreams for our city. We are all committed to working together to try to make this be the best home we can and do everything possible within the means available to us to make that happen. So that's a very important thing. We are entering now one of the most festive times of the year. In fact, this week, Thanksgiving happens on Thursday, so I wanted to wish all of you and your families a wonderful, safe, and happy Thanksgiving. We do have a lot of things to be grateful for here in our fine city. I'm going to take a quick moment to go through a couple items that we have on the list of community calendar events. And there's a number of really fun things we can do here as a community. First is on November 25th is a fundraising event called Hail to the Bird. It's a 5K race that'll be down at Hamlet Park. There is a pre-registration that you can look up online. That begins at 9 a.m. that morning. Second, beginning the 29th of November and running through the entire holiday season, is the Holiday Lights Tour. And on our city's webpage, we have a map listing out all the different residents that have added their homes onto that list. It's a great opportunity to go down, grab a cup of hot cocoa, drive around the community, take a look at all the lights, and see the great work people do to help make that be one of the brightest times of the year. We also have the Cottage Grove annual tree lighting right here at City Hall, 5:45 p.m. on the 1st of December. And I'll also highlight down at River Oaks, we have the Santa Breakfast on December 12th, and that'll be from 9:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. So a lot of cool things that are happening here as a community. I also wanted to highlight a really good bit of business that took place at our last city council meeting. Our finance department worked on rebidding a number of general obligation bonds. So when we bond out for various things that we do, we had a bonding process a number of years ago that came in at a higher rate. Because of the great fiscal management of our city, we were able to take $3.84 million and rebond that and get the interest down to 1.004, which is amazing. That's almost free money. And that saved us as a community over $330,000, which we can return in value back to the community and our taxpayers by running a really good business. The last thing I want to do is mention, and I know that all of you are aware of this here because there's a face that's missing from the middle of the council dais. Our very own Tony Kambata was appointed onto the city council back on the 17th of November. And so it's a great opportunity to have him. As you all know, he brings tremendous value and background to our city. We also had a number of other individuals, I think 8 other people that had applied in. Great backgrounds and resumes, and a lot of people that would be excellent in any position with us. But Tony was selected unanimous 4-0 to fill that spot. And so what I would like to do tonight is provide an opportunity for Council Member Tony Kambata to come up. He would like to address our team here in the Planning Commission.
Good evening. It's really weird standing here, looking over there, rather than the opposite.
Give us your address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Spent nearly 5 years on that side of the dais, and the information, the interaction with the community was invaluable in what I do in my personal life and how I've continued to serve the community. And, it was kind of bittersweet to leave the Planning Commission, but especially on a night like tonight, with a packed house, seeing how you guys conduct yourselves really does make me proud and, look forward to what the good work that you guys are going to continue to be able to do here. And if tonight was no indication, we know, but they may not know, what you guys do up there is not easy, but it is important. And community engagement is important. And as much as we may disagree in the audience with some of the outcomes up there, it's important that we all get here and get to have dialogue. So I just sincerely want to thank you all for your volunteerism, your time, your effort. I know you all left somebody at home or skipped dinner to be here tonight, and that means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. And so the last point of business for me is to open myself to any questions that you may have for myself or a question representing some of the work we do on the City Council.
Any questions for Councilmember Dennis? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to 8.2, response to Planning Commission inquiries. There were none. 8.3, Planning Commission requests. Any requests from the commission? Seeing none, we'll move on to 8.4, election of a vice chair. So at this point, I'd be looking for any nominations for someone who'd like to serve, either nominate themselves or nominate somebody else on the council who'd like to be vice chair. If there are none, Commissioner Rasmussen did suggest a nomination. Commissioner Fisher.
I would just like to agree with Commissioner Rasmussen and nominate Mr. Britton for vice chair.
So we have a nomination for Commissioner Britton. Do you accept that nomination?
Yes, I do.
All right. Any other nominations?
I mean, while we're at it, I'll nominate him as well.
All right. Second nomination for Commissioner Britton.
Yeah, for the job.
All right. All those in favor of making Commissioner Britton the vice chair of the Planning Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Measure carries 5-0. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Britton. Second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Wright. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.